Vincent, I think you're on mute.
Yeah.
It's okay. You hear me?
Wow. Excellent.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Perfect.
Do you want to start?
We have 36 attendees now. Yes. I think we can start.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Welcome everyone to the launch of the OECD reports, A Region's Industrial Transition 2023, New Approaches to Persistent Problems. Just for you to know, this webinar will be recorded, and during the meeting, all the participants, please feel free to raise questions or share your thoughts in writing through the Q&A, and you can find the Q&A buttons at the bottom of your screen. So in the next hour and a half, we will first hear opening remarks from the European Commission and the OECD. And this will be followed by a keynote speech and also a presentation from the OECD regarding this project and the key findings of the reports. There will also be a panel discussion with some pilot region representatives. And you can find the agenda to the events on the link to the agenda in the chat room. So without further ado, I would like to first give the floor to Catherine Wentz, Head of Units for Smart and Sustainable Growth from DG Regio European Commission. Catherine, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everybody. I'm very happy to be here with the latest event on this important project for us. So I'm happy to be here to take note of the progress that we have all made and to reflect on the lessons learned. To take a little step back in time, the Commission launched a small industrial transition initiative before my time back in 2018. And this is the project which we're, in a sense, still involved in here today. The project is in itself over, and then we have the report that puts together the pilot regions' experiences and lessons. So first of all, of course, a thank you from our side to all the pilot regions that responded in 2018 to the call from the Commission to participate in the pilot. And of course, also thank you to the great OECD team that supported you, the regions, and us at the European Commission in this initiative. In its essence, the pilot was all about change management, which is never easy, whether it's personal, institutional, regional, or national. Industrial transition requires adaptation and cooperation between public authorities, local business, and society. It requires leadership and understanding the problems, the ability to convince stakeholders, and build schemes to support the transition. We at DG Regio have been supporting regions and member states in their efforts for economic, territorial, and social cohesion efforts. This is really what cohesion policy is for. I hope that the regions that were in the industrial transition pilot felt that they benefited from the possibility to test and experiment while they were designing schemes for addressing industrial transition challenges. I found it very interesting, I must say, looking thematically at the range of issues that the pilots covered. So they were looking at circularity and sustainability, social inclusion in companies, the digital skills and innovation-led growth. So really a huge range of the challenges facing many regions, all regions in Europe today. During this process of this project, we've held several events with you and also a broader set of stakeholders as part of the international forum. And the OECD has now put the experiences into this new report. From our side, we hope that we've helped you in addressing your specific needs in designing measures aimed at helping your regions and countries. And I have to say, I hope that other regions can also learn from the experiences that you have had. And that's, of course, why we're having the session today and why we've had the previous sessions of dissemination. You and the regions and the member states were the ones who identified the specific problems that you were trying to solve. And the Commission provided some funding so that you could experiment with the policy responses to the issues you had identified for addressing industrial transition challenges. Embarking on this trip with you also helped us to see how the policy experimentation works and what kind of lessons we can take and apply to the mainstream programs that we at DG Regio manage jointly with the member states. addressing global challenges in a local context requires a tailored approach. This is what we did with the pilots, and I hope that the report compiled by the OECD will help other countries and regions by learning of how you managed industrial transition in your specific circumstances. Globalization, technological change will continue, evolve, or accelerate further, and having the experiences catalogued in the report is a useful reference for others who embark on the complicated journey of industrial transition. Each experience is, of course, different and context specific, but learning from 10 regions and 2 member states on how to embrace innovation, decarbonization, digitization, and how to develop the skills for the future could help others in both the policy design and implementation. I'm afraid change is never over, and there will certainly be new circumstances to which we will have to adapt. The EU cohesion policy will continue to be there to support regions in this change, and your hands-on experience should, we hope, serve as a very useful reference to others. What I take from this process, amongst many things, is that key for successful transformation is smooth cooperation. And on this note of cooperation, I want to thank the regions and the participating member states, and of course the OECD, for the good cooperation that we had in this project. It was really a prerequisite for the success, and I'm sure, as I said, that you learned that it's also key for delivering the positive change in your regions and member states. Many thanks. I'm looking forward to hearing further from you in this morning's session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. And now I would like to give the floor to Dorothée Alain Dupré, Head of Division for Regional Development and Multi-Level Governance in the Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions and Cities at the OECD. Dorothée, please.
Thank you very much, Wing, and thank you, Catherine, for your introduction and your kind words. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all, wherever you are in the world. I'm very pleased to participate in this virtual launch today. I would like to thank, of course, the European Commission, DG Regio, for initiating and supporting this project. Particular thanks go to Catherine and her team for their constant guidance, and for Peter Berkowitz, who initiated the project in 2017, as Catherine mentioned. This project has been quite unique from an OECD standpoint, because the objectives were, as recalled by Catherine, really to work hand in hand with a group of regions and countries and with the European Commission to identify experimental ways to managing industrial transition. So in the first phase of the project, from 2018-19, we worked with regions to identify new approaches to innovation and smart specialization. As a result of this first phase, the regions and the countries involved developed and began to implement a series of pilot initiatives and policy experiments. And in the past 2 years, in 2021, 2022, we reviewed the impact of these experiments and taken stock of their contributions to addressing industrial transition challenges. So the report we are launching today is the culmination, in a way, of this second phase. It has been really for the OECD a privilege to be able to work with the same regions and countries over such an extended period of time, almost 7 years. So many thanks to all the regions involved, Centre-Val de Loire, Hauts-de-France, Grand Est, Wallonia, East and North Finland, North Middle Sweden, Cantabria, Greater Manchester, and to the 2 countries, Slovenia and Lithuania, that participated in the project, and for really the very active collaboration throughout the project. So why is this topic so important for all of us? We know that industrial transition and its associated challenges are not new. Industrial transition has directly affected regional labor markets, opportunities and productivity in OECD countries and regions for quite a few decades. And we discussed this also on Wednesday during the launch of our report on the future of rural manufacturing. Between the years 2000-2018, OECD countries have witnessed 8.6 million jobs lost in the manufacturing sector. Regions in industrial transition tend to have higher than national average unemployment rates, lower GDP per capita than the national average. They experience low GDP growth and have lower productivity levels. They also tend to host more polluting jobs at risk from the transition to net zero. So on top of the economic and the social challenges that this raises, all of these factors contribute to a growing discontent in these regions. And addressing this geography of discontent is a top priority, given that it risks leading to social unrest and political instability. But of course, the policy solutions are not as self-evident, and there is no silver bullet. The solutions traditionally used to address the industrial transition, focusing on innovation-based activities to boost productivity, have not yielded to the desired results. So over the past few years, the participating regions in this project and countries have explored, designed, and tested broader approaches to industrial transition, approaches that move beyond technology-driven innovation to take a more integrated and territorially relevant approach. They have experimented with new policy, for example, regional attractiveness to attract and retain workforce, new funding schemes, new procedures to reduce administrative burden, new application of traditional mechanisms such as vouchers, and so on. They have also experimented with new ways to design policy and project, new governance approach, focused really on active stakeholder engagement, as mentioned by Catherine, from the beginning of the process. And many have developed co-produced initiatives for the first time. So I would like very briefly to mention 4 takeaways from this work. First, in the past, the focus has been on R&D and technology-driven innovation, but we know this is not sufficient. It's often not appropriate for some of these regions which do not have an enterprise ecosystem to support this form of innovation. In such cases, the definition of innovation and the support given to innovation need to encompass managerial and operational innovation, social innovation, public sector innovation, and so on. Regions must consider a wide variety of areas that contribute to growth and productivity, including the role of SMEs and entrepreneurship, skills and jobs of the future, the green transition. Second, to do this, local and regional actors need to be involved almost by definition to design policy intervention that build on each region's existing capabilities and legacies. This is not something that can be managed from national government only. Finding ways to involve local and regional actors and institutionalizing the dialogue among levels of government is really integral to new approaches to industrial transition. Third, experimental governance can contribute to advancing industrial transition aims, but may do so in a very incremental way, starting step by step, because it takes time. And success will depend on good strategic programming practices, well-designed monitoring and evaluation systems, and effective stakeholder engagement with a broad range of actors. Success will also depend on the ability to take risk and have a flexible mindset. It's also very important to establish clear, realistic, and ambitious goals for the experiment in collaboration with stakeholders, and to take stock of the human resources needed. The most successful initiatives had a dedicated team responsible for designing and implementing the experiment. So you will hear a lot more in a few minutes from the participating regions, from our experts, from the OECD. But in conclusion, I believe that the insights from this project are particularly timely at a time when industrial policies are back on the agenda of many OECD countries. And the project has been quite pioneering in this respect and truly innovative in the way it was designed and implemented. And the value of this report is really to show that a very simple fundamental fact is that in many cases, what regions need to be transformed is not simply more money, but also establishing different ways of doing things by introducing innovative governance approaches and new possibilities to experiment. So looking ahead, we plan to continue working with regions in industrial transition in the future and to disseminate at global level example of what works in new approaches to persistent problems. I look forward to hearing all your insights in the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dorothée, and also to Catherine for setting the scene and highlighting the importance and also the complexity of this topic. Now I would like to move to the next item, and we will have the keynote speech focusing on the role of experimental governance, delivered by our expert Pedro Marquez, from the research fellow from Ingenio. It's a joint institute of the Higher Council for Scientific Research and the Polytechnic University of Valencia. So the floor is yours, Pedro.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much. I will just start by sharing my screen. And I hope you can now see the presentation. Is that correct? Okay, perfect. Well, okay, so thank you to all of you participating in this seminar and collaborating. I would also, of course, like to thank the OECD for the invitation, in particular Verinia and Wing, who helped organize this seminar. And I'd also like to thank Catherine and Dorothée for those very interesting presentations, which actually align very well with what I'm going to say today in hopefully 15 to 20 minutes maximum. I think it's important to state, and again, this has already been said, that there's a growing consensus that, well, first of all, there is, of course, a consensus around the fact that territorial inequalities, especially if they're persistent over time, can generate a lot of problems. I think up until recently, we often talked about the economic, social problems. More recently, we started talking about also the political problems that this generates, the discontent. And one of the things that has become sort of a consensus is that the key to better innovation policy are institutions, and in particular governance, right? So you can have the best designed innovation policy, the best instruments, but if the institutions aren't working well, if you don't make good decisions, basically, you don't have good outcomes. And sometimes I think also once we accept that institutions are key, we have to understand that we also, in order to have good innovation policy, we also need good innovation in the public sector itself, in those people delivering the policy, designing and delivering policies. They also have to be innovative in the way that they do things. And this is where I think the role of experimental governance comes in. Experimental governance is, let's say, a form of innovation in the public sector, or in the governance system, which can help maybe disrupt or change or realign the way an innovation policy has worked, and try to generate better outcomes. Okay, so first of all, from reading the literature and the examples, I think I would boil down in experimental governance to three dimensions that are quite fundamental. The first of all, experimental governance is, of course, experimental. It's in the name. And this means something that is novel and ambitious. So I think there's definitely this idea that there's some sort of rupture or change from the past. It's not just about supporting incumbent firms that exist, or supporting incumbent sectors, or continuing the same forms of support. It's about coming up with something that can be creative, novel. I think it's also fundamental, this was also mentioned by Dorothée, it's this idea that policy that is collaborative, you need to involve stakeholders, but also it's collaborative across levels of governance. So the local government collaborating with regional, state, national, international authorities, but also governments collaborating with non-state actors, with firms, with universities, with social actors, etc. And also, very importantly, it's a policy that includes learning mechanisms. I think that this is not highlighted enough, but this is actually quite fundamental. We need mechanisms to monitor, and more importantly, to learn from what we've been doing. Now, I would say, and I think maybe this is why sometimes these policies don't fail, don't deliver what we're expected from them, is that unfortunately we have this not contradiction, this paradox. The things that attract people's attention, that attract policymakers' attention, that attract stakeholders' attention, often go in this direction. Everyone wants to talk about the experimental or the novel and ambitious side of the policy. The collaborative side, I think people increasingly understand the role of engaging stakeholders, and often the monitoring is an afterthought, is a thing that you do at the end. You come up with a bunch of indicators. I would actually argue that for a policy to work well, you need to look at it from the other perspective. We need to start from the bottom. These are the building blocks. Without these building blocks, you cannot implement innovation policy, experimental governance, any type of policy correctly. Because without these building blocks, you cannot learn, you cannot adapt, and therefore you are undermining the principle of experimental governance, which is about doing new things, okay? So let me now go one by one, let's say distilling a little bit what each of these dimensions means. and why I believe this is the building block. Okay, first of all, monitoring and learning. I think we all understand what it is. All of us who've been involved or at least have studied policy in a way know that it's part of policy. But the question though is how to do it in a way that allows you to deliver experimental governance. So I think that there's, let's say, what I call here the worst case scenario. This is when you do it as an afterthought and you're just trying to meet requirements. You come up with a number of indicators that allows you to report to your funders that you've met the targets. Very simple indicators that don't necessarily provide any sort of important information that allows you to learn. A good case scenario, which I think is often what a lot of territories, regions, or local governments or national governments choose, is you create a team that is dedicated to monitoring and learning, a group of people that are specialized in collecting data and producing data. This is, I think, an improvement from what we see in a lot of places, but I still don't think it's the ideal scenario. The ideal scenario is what we can call decentralized monitoring and learning. There's been some experiments with this. I know in the Netherlands, there's been some experiments with this type of policy at the local level. For example, recently Wales won some important sources of funding to try with this. And here what you do is you actually train all the people that are involved in delivering the policy at all different levels to acquire some basic statistical knowledge and some basic knowledge of how to collect data. And you basically make the whole system capable of learning, of acquiring knowledge about what's working, how it's working, and learning. And then you, of course, have feedback mechanisms that allow people at the top to make decisions based on that learning. This is the ideal scenario. Now, what are the opportunities if you do monitoring and learning well? First, you can learn and you can adapt. There's no learning if you're not monitoring what you're doing, okay? If you're just implementing policy and not looking back, not trying to understand what worked, what didn't work, and what worked better, you have no opportunity to learn and you have no opportunity to adapt. Accountability is very important, of course. I think all of us involved in public sector delivery, we often think about accountability to the public, but also accountability to the stakeholders, make people know and have a very clear idea of what happened, why it worked, why things are changing, and why some things are continuing. And coordination. Again, the only way you can coordinate different actors, different stakeholders, is if you know what's happening. Therefore, you can share knowledge, disseminate knowledge, and try to make things improve. Now, what are the big challenges? This is where I think often we don't discuss this enough, on the ground challenges. First of all, a lot of territories have a lack of resources. I have a lot of experience with this, where I've often engaged with policymakers, and you hear about, you read the strategy, you look at the monitoring side or even other sides, you think, oh, this looks very good, and then you go on the ground and there's one person maybe doing this part-time, and no one actually pays that much attention to what they're doing. This is just a reality. There's typical implementation issues. This is just something that people who study policy have been discussing for a long time. Most policies fail not at the design stage, but at the implementation stage. So it's when you actually have to do, let's say, the groundwork of implementing the policy, in this case, monitoring and learning, that things often fail because maybe the people who have power to take decisions, they don't focus on this particular side. Maybe the people that are supposed to be doing the work for some reason get diverted to other things. There's also another fundamental thing that I don't think we discuss enough. Knowledge is power. We all know this, right? And sometimes you have resistance from the people in the system about implementing better monitoring and learning mechanisms, because they don't necessarily want to share the knowledge of what they're doing. They might be afraid of being audited. They might even just be afraid of what could happen if a higher authority had a greater capacity to understand or to evaluate or to criticize the system. So when it comes to collaborative policy, this is the second building block. How to do it? All of us who have been working with smart specialization in the European Union have to deal with this, particularly through what we call in the entrepreneurial discovery process. But this is something that a lot of other regions and countries around the world have tried to do, is try to involve a large number of stakeholders in the design and in particular the implementation of policy. It's fairly simple. Wide stakeholder consultation. It's not simple to do, but the idea is fairly simple. Also very important, you don't just listen to the people at the design stage, you have inclusive governance arrangements. What this means is that as the policy is being implemented, as you are learning and adapting and making decisions, you include the wide the wider stakeholder group in the decision-making process, and you inform people and you keep them updated. And of course, feedback mechanism. This is fundamental. Okay, there's the famous model of voice or exit in organizations, which says that a good organization is one that allows for voice, allows for feedback. If you don't allow for feedback, if you don't allow for people, particularly if you have a decentralized learning system, if you don't allow for people to voice their concerns or particularly voice the negative things, which are often the things we don't want to hear, you cannot really achieve this sort of collaborative policy. This is both within the public sector and when engaging with stakeholders. What are the opportunities? This is definitely something that was, I think, quite a big part of smart specialization and the idea behind the entrepreneurial discovery process. You have better knowledge of the system and its components. If you only listen to a small group of people, particularly if that small group of people doesn't change over time, you might not be aware of opportunities in the science sector for maybe technologies that have been developed that could be applied to the private sector. You won't hear about opportunities in the third sector. If you're trying to develop innovation in health, if you don't talk to the patients, to the patient groups, you will not hear about their practical needs, what they actually, what things you could, different goods and services you could develop in order to meet their needs. Also very important, you mobilize stakeholders. Okay, if you want a policy to work, particularly one that is novel and ambitious, you need people to be committed to it. And how do? You do it by engaging with them and keeping them engaged. And you maintain commitments, which is precisely what the previous point was talking about. What are the challenges, though? And this is, again, I think things that we don't often talk about. Stakeholders sometimes do not want innovation policy. Maybe they don't understand its value, or maybe they just believe that the priority should be something else. Okay, this is a very important point. There's an element of working with people also to explain to them why we are doing this, why this is going to be the priority over the next few years, why we have to invest in this. And I've seen it happen in regions where there was not an innovation culture. And when there is political commitment, when there is commitment from the governance system that innovation is a priority, over time, you can demonstrate its results, you can encourage people to participate, and you can create this innovation process. So this is very important. Also, sometimes stakeholders don't want innovation policy because they lack the capabilities to do it. They lack the capabilities to participate in collaborative R&D projects. They lack the capabilities to invest in risky activities. So this is also very important, but I think it's also something that you can probably, or you can try to solve by trying to create this innovation culture. The third point, I think, is actually the most problematic and the hardest. Broad consultation can challenge entrenched elites. So if you have a small group of companies or a small group of networks that are used to dominating innovation policy, they might feel threatened by this idea that you will listen to everyone, that you will include everyone. But that is also, I think, where something like an innovative policy, experimental governance, can try to be used to break through this entrenched interest and try to spread out and disseminate and beyond a small group the benefits and the opportunities that exist. And so we arrive at the top, right? The thing that I said that primarily attracts interest, but actually should be the third building block. We should start from making sure we're going to learn, then we should think about how we're going to engage people, and then we should think about, okay, what exactly are we going to do? Now, again, there's many ways we can think of this. This is, I think, very much influenced by current debates at the European Union level, but also in other contexts about what innovation policy should be, how we can implement directionality in innovation. This is a concept that, for example, Mariana Mazzucato and others have talked about. One, I think, very important contemporary challenge, we should focus on societal challenges, things like climate adaptation, water management, health, the aging of the population. These are big societal challenges. One of the ways to be novel and yet ambitious is to align your innovation policy with trying to solve these big issues. We should accept and manage risk. I know that accepting risk in the public sector is always a problem. People may not take kindly to the idea that you are wasting resources, particularly if they perceive or they understand that you indeed are wasting resources. And that's why we have to also be realistic, right? We can accept risk, but we also have to manage it. We cannot just say, well, we're going to have a policy, it's going to be risky, what fails, fails. You cannot do that. The system will not accept it, okay? The public will not accept it, and the stakeholders probably will not accept it. So there is an element of a balance here. And I think a very, very important thing, you need to be realistic. You need to be ambitious, of course.